Hi, everybody. Just a quick announcement. Please keep your cameras and mics off. We're recording this interview, and it's very hard to do that when other people's faces pop in. However, at the end, we're opening the conversation to questions, and at that point, feel free to show yourself if you would like to. And please unmute yourself because you're asking a question. So, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our second HFA Speaks event, revisiting Rethinking Memorial Day. Today, we're going to be talking about Memorial Day, which is coming up this Monday, and analyzing how the fallen soldier is depicted in American culture. I just want to say a quick thank you to Professor Majewski for so generously giving us their time for this discussion. For those of you who don't know, Professor Majewski has been the Michael Douglas Dean of HFA since 2016 and is currently on leave. In 2021, he plans to return to his position as professor in the history department. His expertise is in 19th century history, focusing on the U.S. Civil War, and is the author of the books Modernizing a Slave Economy, The Economic Vision of the Confederate Nation, and Oh, baby! Hi! And A House Dividing Economic Development in Pennsylvania and Virginia Before the Civil War. Because of this knowledge, this will open our discussion to focus on the historical presence of people of color, women, and LGBTQ plus individuals on Memorial Day, which actually began around the ending of the Civil War. So, thank you again, Professor. Is there anything you would like to say before we begin?
No. Well, I guess I want to say thank you. It's a great opportunity to be here, and it's already been kind of like useful for me, even thinking about this event, to kind of like think about the meaning of Memorial Day and the ways we celebrate it, and the way different kinds of soldiers are portrayed in popular media and the historical imagination.
Definitely. So that actually relates really well to the first question I was going to ask you. So, as I said earlier, one of the first Memorial Day celebrations was held after the Civil War, one by freed slaves in Charleston at the end of the Civil War. And around the same time, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, a group that has since altered Southern perceptions on the Civil War, was also formed and began to memorialize fallen Confederate soldiers. Given your expertise, how has Memorial Day's origins shaped our present day view of the holiday?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting. You're absolutely right that kind of like the genesis of Memorial Day was in post-Civil War remembrances and commemoration of the war. And there was almost like dueling origins of Memorial Day. And so there were newly freed slaves in Charleston who almost immediately after the war celebrated the fallen soldiers as a celebration of emancipation. But then there are Southerners who claimed that actually it was a group of white women in Vicksburg, Mississippi, who celebrated both fallen Confederate and Union soldiers. And that's the origins of Memorial Day. And it's kind of like really interesting to think about when, as these celebrations and commemorations picked up, they became known as Decoration Day, and that you would literally decorate your, the gravesides and cemeteries of fallen soldiers with flowers and flags. And then that became more formally, eventually evolved into Memorial Day. And this happened exactly at the same time that people were beginning to remember the Civil War as primarily a white man's war, of kind of like the Union soldier trying to keep the country together versus the misguided but nevertheless brave Confederate soldier fighting for their conception of the nation. And African Americans played a hugely significant role in the Civil War as soldiers. And in fact, you can make an argument that they tipped the balance towards the North. But in Memorial Day celebrations, they tended to be kind of left out of the narrative, and it became primarily a way of celebrating whites. And it's one of the ways in which our memory of the fallen soldier tends to be kind of the white male. And when you think about kind of like the three wars that we kind of consider the just wars of American history, the Civil War, World War I and World War II. In those wars, military units were segregated, and it's those white units and the fallen soldiers of those units we tend to think about and celebrate, as opposed to Black soldiers. And it's not as if like Black soldiers are completely left out. I mean, Blacks themselves have honored their fallen Black soldiers, but at the same time, I think it's pretty, the evidence is pretty clear that it's mostly kind of like the Saving Private Ryan kind of way of thinking about fallen soldiers and Memorial Day, that it tends to focus more on kind of the white male.
Oh, that's very true. I was thinking of Save It Private Ryan when you began your answer. And that's actually leads into my next question because in the Vietnam War, which isn't one of the just wars, but had a lot of African American people fighting in it. African Americans accounted for 12.7% of deaths, despite black males only making up 11% of the US population. And even more so, they were 16.3% of draftees in the war, which is incredibly unbalanced. So, given your studies, do you know if there's been a consistent pattern of drafting people from lower income people of color groups for the military? And if so, does this go back all the way to the Civil War, to the origins of Memorial Day, or how does that work?
Yeah, no, it's pretty consistent in US history, at least that what I know best, that the military is drawn from those people who don't have much opportunity elsewhere. And so it's in the 19th century, it's pretty clear that it's from the ranks of the poor that you draw most of your soldiers. And in fact, just to give one example of this, scholars have developed these quantitative methods of studying kind of improvements in living conditions at looking at heights. And you get the heights of like soldiers at different times. And so if you wanted to study what has happened to the stature of the poor and their relative levels of nutrition, you look at soldiers, because soldiers are drawn from pretty consistently from the lowest strata of society. I would say that there are some exceptions to this, especially in the Civil War itself, where to prove your sense of masculinity, there were many kind of middle class and even upper class individuals who certainly volunteered and were part of the war effort. This was especially true among free Blacks in the North. Some of whom were, very successful middle class, upper middle class entrepreneurs, but in essence, they kind of proved their citizenship. They eagerly volunteered for the war. And in fact, kind of the volunteer rates of any group in the United States during the Civil War, it was free Blacks in the North, because they immediately saw this as a war of liberation for the enslaved.
Okay, that's a great point. And thinking about the Civil War just right now, um, never mind. I lost my thought. Let me move on to the next question.
Sure.
Um, so this brings up a good point of how has the U.S. military composition changed and developed since the 19th century, and have women, LGBTQ plus, and people of color been better represented on holidays like Memorial Day, or are we still kind of attached to that Saving Private Ryan narrative or image? And if so, why do you think we are as a
Yeah,
nation?
I think it's kind of like a fascinating kind of like disjuncture. In some ways, the military has recognized as an all volunteer force that it depends upon diversity. And it is among the most diverse, institutions in the United States. At least you can make that argument. And that in some sense, a military service and an all volunteer force can kind of like foster economic mobility. So in the current Army and armed forces, I really do think there is this sense that um, diversity is incredibly important. But yet, when we think about the support for like increased military spending are kind of like, patriotic cause for kind of like a more aggressive posture across the world. It generally comes from more kind of like white conservatives. And so there is this kind of disjuncture, I think, between the actual operation of the military and kind of like political forces supporting militarization. And I think that there's also that disjuncture between the way we think about the fallen and who are the soldiers today. And so I think it kind of goes back that our sense of the fallen soldier is still very much this the white male, but the actual people serving the military today come from all kinds of different backgrounds. And I think it will be really interesting in future conflicts to see how kind of people begin to rethink kind of civic traditions such as Memorial Day.
That's a very that makes great answer. Um, as you were speaking, I was thinking about how we have this dominant narrative for Memorial Day that's pushed a lot by movies like Saving Private Ryan and the military and Southern conservatives, of the idea of the white male fallen soldier. And I was curious to know if you think that's something the military might be pushing to make sure they don't lose that type of support from that area, or do you think in it's more that that's just the narrative that's exists for so long that that's the main narrative everybody attaches to, even though there's probably thousands of different narratives and individual families that are way more diverse than what we currently think of when we represent Memorial Day?
Yeah, it's a kind of interesting question, and I honestly don't know the answer of how kind of like today's military sees Memorial Day, either from kind of like an institutional standpoint, or from the perspective of ordinary soldiers. I think it's a fascinating question. Now, historically, Memorial Day sometimes has been used to celebrate like militarized patriotism. So, like during the Spanish American War, for example, in 1898, kind of like Memorial Day celebrations were used as kind of like an excuse to kind of rile up the population, and like we need to go to war and celebrate these martial values of kind of like courage and bravery, and use that as kind of like to help increase support for the war. And the same thing happened during the Vietnam War as well, where you would have like politicians say, we need to honor the fallen on Memorial Day because these people weren't draft dodgers. They, heroically fought for the country, and that's the values that we should be fostering. So I do think historically there has been that sensibility that Memorial Day can be kind of linked to this kind of militarized version of patriotism, but I'm not sure if that's what is happening today via the armed forces. But I think it's a fascinating question. I think it's a fascinating question to kind of that I would be curious to explore, of how members of the military today and the military as an institution kind of think about Memorial Day and its purpose.
That actually brings up the next question perfectly, which is, how do you think our country's general view of the fallen soldier has changed? And if it hasn't, how can we make Memorial Day more inclusive?
Yeah, I do think there has been some changes, and so this is so like my own area of study is the Civil War, and I've taught a course on the Civil War and popular memory, and it's very true that in terms of the Civil War, that there is more of a recognition of African American soldiers. You think of movies such as Glory, and I think Civil War museums really focus more on Black soldiers. And so I do think it's beginning to change in the margins. And I would imagine that the case in other conflicts as well. But how deep that goes in terms of kind of like popular memory and popular perceptions, I'm not sure. In popular culture, you do see movies, for example, about the Tuskegee Airmen who fought, these black fighter pilots who fought heroically during the Second World War, kind of Rosie the Riveter, kind of the women behind the scenes, is like popularly known. But I do think when it comes to like Memorial Day itself, and as we think about those who have died on behalf of the country, that the stereotype that people have in mind is again generally the white male who has fallen in battle.
Definitely. And because of that view, do you think it's our society or our military's responsibility to change this image, or is it a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both, but mostly society. I mean, we don't. It's like I said, I don't know how the current day military sees it, but I think it's probably kind of like a more general kind of like society and culture issue. And I'd also have would say that it goes deeper than that, right? That if we're rethinking Memorial Day, why what do we want to kind of like get out of it? What's its kind of like purpose? And I think for me thinking about it, there is kind of like we want to kind of keep the patriotism associated with Memorial Day, but a more thoughtful patriotism,
Mhm.
a way of thinking about when our nation goes to war, there are real consequences to that. And kind of thinking about those fallen soldiers as a way of thinking about the consequences and thinking about, we have to think very carefully and very hard about that decision to go to war. And we have to kind of consider the consequences. And so instead of using Memorial Day as a way of kind of like, kind of reflexively celebrating kind of like masculine values of valor and courage, um, it could also be an opportunity just to be more thoughtful about why we go to war, when we go to war, and the consequences of that decisions, and also to think about as we consider the fallen soldiers of our own nation, that we have to keep in mind that they were involved in the conflict in which they were fallen soldiers of other nations
Mhm.
and fallen civilians as well, which kind of, I think, kind of like increases the importance of kind of like really thinking through that when you engage in military conflict, there's often, the highest possible price that some people are paying. And we have to kind of think very long and hard, what's the purpose? Is this a just conflict? And are the reasons we're going for the war worth the possible consequences?
That it was very insightful. And as usual, Professor Majewski, it led right into my next question. Guys, I swear this isn't scripted. This is just happening. What's the best way to acknowledge the past while advocating for change in the future? Like, what's the best way to, like, as you were saying a second ago, to acknowledge how we in the past have used Memorial Day as a way to incentivize people to join the army or to encourage specifically male values, but advocate how can we move forward without denying that the past existed or still exists?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like if like how do we change like culture and society? And it's not an easy, but I think this is why we have universities, right? Where these are opportunities for us to kind of like think deeply together as like instructors and as students and as scholars to like step back and take a look, like what are the fundamental values we're celebrating here? What are we really doing? And to kind of like have that sense of like being critical thinkers as we approach Memorial Day. We do this. I don't think we should ignore the emotions of Memorial Day, which I think are really profound. We I think Memorial Day can serve an incredibly important civic function. I think it can even be kind of like a healing function in many respects, but I think it has to be approached in the right way. And throughout our history, that hasn't always been the case. But I think all change ultimately begins with individuals. And here at the university, kind of like beginning that process of kind of thinking, or I should put it this way, being more thoughtful about Memorial Day in kind of a critical manner, I think is the place to start.
All right. Well, that was all of my prepared questions. But before we open up the floor to our audience, and feel free to start putting your questions in the chat, everybody, is there anything else you would like to say about the
Um, no, I really kind of like enjoyed the questions, and like I said before, this event is really like interesting for me because as somebody who teaches military history and reads about it, kind of like, well, what is the history and purpose of a Memorial Day? It's just not like one of those questions that occurred to me. So I really appreciate the questions, and I really kind of like appreciate this event for kind of like pushing me in a way to kind of like think through what this holiday has meant and what it might mean in the future.
Well, thank you very much. I didn't do this by myself. I gotta shout out my fellow interns and Professor Nomi Morris for. Without them, this event would not be here. And I am now opening the floor up to any questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself or show your face if you would like, or just type your questions in the chat. Okay, we have one right here. As far as we know, is it left up to individual minority groups to memorialize their fallen? Is that how it starts? And by it, I think it means No, I'm I'm not sure if Nomi means diversifying the idea of Memorial Day, but that's what I'm gonna assume. Oh, change. That how change starts?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can't really answer that question for the 21st century, but historically, um, because military units were segregated, largely segregated until after the Second World War, um, there and because there was a tremendous backlash against returning soldiers, and this is kind of like one of the interesting things about military service, pre World War II, is that many Blacks saw military service as a way of claiming equality. And so Frederick Douglass during the Civil War, for example, was all for kind of Blacks volunteering and serving in the Union Army because they would kind of like prove their worth. Um, and kind of having a union uniform was a sense of equality and a way of claiming citizenship. And to a lesser extent, that happened during the Spanish American War, the First World War, and the Second World War as well. But what happened is that when Black soldiers returned home, they often faced, sometimes very vicious backlash. And so, especially after the First World War, for example, there were a series of well-known lynchings and riots aimed at returning Black veterans who were claiming this sense of citizenship. So historically, it has often been the case that it's been kind of up to different groups to kind of honor their own dead and honor their own veterans because it just wasn't included in the national vision. And I, like I said in my earlier, I think it's going to be really fascinating going forward what's going to happen. Um, you know, in terms of popular culture, in terms of our conception of the fallen soldier, as we fight more and more conflicts with a very kind of like diverse, all volunteer force, where I think there's kind of going to be more of a culture, and especially more of an incentive by the military to kind of, in a way, honor um, everyone who has fought, everyone who has kind of fallen for the nation, and kind of like make it a much more inclusive occasion.
That's a very good answer to that question. And I guess it's all, this is just me talking, but I guess it's also a little bit on us to accept, well, to memorialize all these different groups as well. So that way, if everybody starts memorializing them, then the idea becomes more open. And I, the memories of all these different people fall to everybody. I I remember once I I don't remember the exact statistic, but like if every person alive was given the history, like a history of like different people to remember, every person on the world would get 11 names that they would have to remember of people who have died before them. And I think that idea is something we sadly can't do because, records. But it's definitely something that we should try to impart onto future generations to think of everybody when we think of the past, not just a select few.
Right.
And Nomi said, I suppose we still have ways to go before we think of a gay soldier as our prototypical soldier. I agree, Nomi. We do have a ways to go. I don't have anything else to say. We just have a ways to go, and that's on us as a society.
Right.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Susan.
Thank, hi, John. So thank you. So, if I may, I have a few thoughts and questions to
Sure.
share. Interestingly, our colleague John Lee gave a small presentation through the Veterans Resource Team today, and began by uh, showing us a picture that was taken 3 years after the end of the Civil War of a veterans commemoration group, essentially, and talked about how already 3 years after the end of the war, it became necessary to form groups interested in commemoration because the memory of the fallen soldier was already fading. But what was interesting about the photograph was that the standard bearer was an African American man.
Mm.
So and he suggested that the early organizations of soldiers to commemorate were integrated. So thought that was
Yeah,
interesting.
no, that 30 years after the war, that wouldn't necessarily surprise me, but my understanding by the 1870s, when you start getting the, kind of like more formal Memorial Day celebrations,
Mhm.
that's precisely when you begin to see kind of, basically Reconstruction has come to this inglorious end. Kind of white supremacy is taking over the South, and
Mhm.
so that's when you begin to see kind of like it's a fairly self-conscious effort to kind of make the war a white man's war in memory, and it was certainly contested at the time, and there were certainly many Black leaders, including Frederick Douglass, who kind of kept alive the memory
Yeah.
of the Black soldier and the Black soldier's importance. But yeah, no, it's like it's very kind of like totally complicated, and I would imagine that even in the 1870s, you might find
Yeah.
celebrations that would at least acknowledge African
Right.
American soldiers.
And of course, the standard bearer was really the position of greatest honor because it was he who carried the flag into battle who was most
Absolutely, right.
vulnerable. Right. So here's my question. You
Sure.
you said that you suggested that rather than thinking about the masculine values such as courage, we need to think about the consequences of war. So thinking about the consequences of war, of course, changes situationally when you have skin in the game. And we know, for example, that we're at isn't it true, the all-time low historically in terms of the number of our government leaders
Right.
who who have children who are in the military, for example. And so my question for you is, do you think thinking about the implication of service
Right.
for all citizens is an alternative? In other words, we at the university can certainly think about the consequences of war, but let's be realistic. We are at such a remove, and we have the luxury of thinking.
Right.
We have young people, such as those on the, on the call today, who whose perspectives might change if there were a national service requirement, which is
Mhm.
a requirement, a civil service requirement, not that one necessarily serves in the military, but then one serves civilly or otherwise one's country. And I'm just wondering, your thoughts about that. Do you think a mandatory civil service would be of value in terms of our relation to things like courage and the romantic view of war and the abstractions, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I tend to be opposed to it myself, mostly because I think that, just as some of the statistics that Hannah cited, um, that, kind of the rich will find a way out, and it will still fall upon the relatively poor, as was the case in kind of like the military draft. But I mean, a more national service oriented requirement that includes the military, but not exclusive to the military, I think is kind of like a more interesting idea. But I don't know if that would still give like national leaders the skin in the game that would make them think twice. I mean, I think there should be political consequences for engaging in unnecessary war that would make a political leader think twice. But I'm not sure if that's a good argument for national service. Now, I do think that given the polarized nature of our society, that you can imagine kind of like a national service requirement, like bringing together people from different class backgrounds, from different racial backgrounds, different regional backgrounds, different political backgrounds. Um, I do think that as our nation becomes more polarized, that increases like the utility of some kind of national service. If you could think some kind of like intermixing of society and creating like a more coherent society should come around. I do worry personally about the kind of coercive elements, and that if you make service a requirement, is it really service anymore? Or is it something that you do your best to kind of like minimize and move on, and also the devil's in the details of like what kind of service would people be doing for how long, and all of those sorts of issues. But I know that has actually gotten quite a bit of support from kind of people on the liberal progressive side of politics, just because of giving this sense of more skin in the game for decisions like war and peace, but also I think just kind of like creating an ethos of like we are part of a greater community, and that is kind of something helpful to foster.
Thank you.
Oh, before we move on to Olga's question, I just wanted to point out a question from the chat, or not a question, but an acknowledgement in the chat, where Nomi Morris said the effort to get it passed, it being the mandatory service requirement, no matter how worthy, would be highly politicized and polarized, which is definitely true. And I also want to acknowledge that earlier we mentioned that it'll be a long time before a gay soldier would be viewed as our typical fallen soldier. But we're currently at a place right now where transgender people are still banned from the military due to a Trump era policy. And I just wanted to acknowledge that's existence as a reminder that we still have a lot of things to do to go forward. And before Memorial Day can probably be the all inclusive holiday it deserves to be. And now, Olga, please feel free to unmute yourself or show yourself on camera.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would show myself on camera, but my camera is sadly still broken. I wanted to thank you for sharing your very insightful thoughts. And I also wanted to ask you a question. So I am a graduate student in the Department of Classics. And so when I think about commemoration, I also immediately think about Pericles' funeral oration and how in that text we have, yes, a celebration of ideals of courage and strength on the battlefield, but also an acknowledgement of the pain and the sort of loss of the families. And so this very interesting interplay between commemoration and mourning and loss. And so I wonder if you can say a little bit more about what you have found, especially in your research, about this interplay and how it can make us reflect on Memorial Day and just sort of having these two different components that are kind of complementary but also very different in mind.
Yeah, I do think that there are these, you're absolutely right. There are these kind of like two different components, like, that sense of loss, that sense of mourning, but also kind of like a celebration in essence of like heroism and courage and valor and all of that. And I do think that that sense of mourning and loss is especially important for those who have directly experienced that loss, like the families and the loved ones of those who have died in battle. And I think it's actually what you're highlighting is it's kind of like a problem of studying this from the standpoint of memory and nationalism and politics, because you tend to kind of overlook that really keen sense of loss that people still felt many years after losing a son or losing a father or losing a relative. And I think that people naturally want to attach some greater meaning to that sense of loss, and in a way wanting to attach a sense of meaning to that sense of loss can kind of lead to the celebration of these values, and in some cases leads you down to this kind of militarized patriotism, because in kind of like making sense of death, you kind of want to kind of make it part of this bigger narrative of the nation. And I kind of like have seen this personally when my father passed away 3 years ago. He was a veteran and served in the Army. And he didn't really, when I was growing up, attach that much value to his Army service and kind of laughed it off. But in his last days, and he's thinking about his life and thinking about making meaning of it, that sense of service in the military suddenly became very, very important to him. And in fact, he very much wanted to be buried with a flag, like many veterans do, and really wanted to make that kind of like an important part of his identity in the way he was remembered. And so I see these as like, I think you're absolutely right. They're two different parts, and it's easy to lose that sense of real loss and mourning. But it's also, there are ways in which they can be connected because we want to make meaning of that sense of loss. And I think that is something of very human and really important.
Thank you, Olga. We have another hand up. Professor Sorup here. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I was just sort of inspired to ask this question following up on what you just said, John, about, sort of making meaning and creating narratives and so on, and also following up on a kind of an earlier thread about the polarization and of our current, political world. And just, I mean, has it been historically with Memorial Day that political parties have kind of, fought it out to, kind of attach themselves in different ways to the celebration and to kind of create their own narratives that also reflect on their current, kind of policies and priorities? Or is that just something that we're going to get this year? I'm just wondering, I'm sure we're going to get it this year, but is that something that's historically been part of Memorial Day?
Yeah, it will be fascinating to kind of like, compare in like a systematic way, like how Biden marks Memorial Day versus the way Trump did, right? And I do think there are some differences in the way different groups and different parties have marked Memorial Day, at least historically. And like I said earlier, it's there is this historical evidence where it's clear that sometimes a Memorial Day has been used to kind of like support what I would call kind of a militarized patriotism. But I don't think Memorial Day has to be that way. And I think we can kind of like celebrate and give meaning and importance to the lives fallen soldiers have given the nation, but be kind of like thoughtful, reflective, and have kind of like a more kind of like critical approach to like, well, what does this say about the meaning of war and the meaning of violence, and when we want to do that. But I would, imagine like everything in our society right now, it will all become politicized. And but there have been, and I think in the past it has also been politicized, but I think kind of like the currents were probably at different times muted the differences, but at other times in starker relief, and like and especially during wartime, I think historically you saw that kind of sharp relief in the way people approach Memorial Day.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. So thank you all for coming. This is, as I said, the second of our HFA Speaks events, which will continue next year. If anybody is interested in learning more about HFA, please check out our website, or right now I'm posting in the chat a link to subscribe to our newsletter, where you will hear more about HFA events that are coming up in the future, and hopefully more HFA Speaks. So once again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Professor Majewski, for spending time, as Romy said, for being so insightful and interesting. And, well, thank you for being here. I'm glad we were...
Well, it was my pleasure, and thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone for attending. I really enjoyed the event and really enjoyed Hannah's questions and the questions from the audience.
We're getting a lot of thumbs up in the Zoom.